I had been married for 4 years when my sister stood up in front of 30 people and turned my empty house into the joke of our parents' anniversary dinner. My mother smiled, my father laughed, and everyone around the table joined in. None of them knew my wedding ring was hanging on a chain under my shirt. My name is Valerie. I'm 39. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I manage contracts for a regional hospital system, which means I spend most of my day finding the sentence somebody hoped no one would notice. That skill would matter later, because in my family, the ugliest things were rarely said directly. They usually came disguised as jokes, favors, or little assumptions everyone expected me to accept. My parents are Maureen and Doug. My sister Marlo is 2 years younger, married at 24, and has 3 children. My brother Wells is the youngest and the only son, which has always carried a strange amount of weight in our family. Then there was me, single, as far as they knew, which apparently meant permanently available. If Dad needed a ride somewhere, Mom called me. If Grandma's aide canceled, I was expected to stay with her. If somebody needed something picked up across town, the answer was usually the same. Call Valerie. She's flexible. But whenever Marlo was asked to do anything, Mom had another sentence ready. Marlo has the kids. I heard that so many times it stopped sounding like an explanation. It became a rule, and somehow every version of that rule ended with me changing my plans. 3 years ago, Ethan and I had tickets to a matinee in the city. We had planned it weeks ahead because his locksmith shop was finally having one of those rare slow periods that only happened a couple of times a year. 2 days before, Mom called. Val, I need you Friday afternoon. Not, are you free? I need you. I told her Ethan and I already had plans. There was a pause. What plans? We have tickets. We bought them weeks ago. Oh, I knew that. Oh. She had heard me, but she had not yet decided my answer counted. Then she said, my new living room furniture is being delivered Friday. They gave me a window from noon to 5. I waited. Okay, I need you to be at the house. Why aren't you going to be there? Another pause. I'm having lunch with Diane and Carol. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. You want me to cancel my plans so you don't have to cancel lunch? Valerie, it's furniture. You just have to let them in and make sure they put everything where it belongs. Then you can do that. Her voice changed immediately. I already made plans. So did I. Silence. Then she sighed. Your father has work. Marlo has the kids. I really don't understand why everything has to become such a production with you. I stared at the wall. Mom, Ethan and I have been planning this for weeks. You can go somewhere with Ethan another weekend. There it was. Her lunch was a plan. My day with Ethan was replaceable. I should have told her no. Instead, I heard myself say, fine, I'll do it. Her voice softened instantly. I knew I could count on you. We sold the tickets. Friday afternoon, my mother sat across town having lunch with her friends while I waited alone in her house for a sofa, 2 chairs, a coffee table, and a cabinet she had spent 3 weeks choosing. At 4:55, nothing had arrived. Then Mom texted me, they're probably running behind. Just stay until they get there. No thank you, no apology, just stay. The truck finally arrived almost an hour late. By the time I got home, Ethan was in the kitchen. He took one look at me and asked how it went. Fine. Then, without even thinking, I added, it wasn't anything important anyway. Ethan looked at me for a moment, not angry, that would have been easier. He just said, okay, and went out to the garage. I stood there realizing something I should have understood years earlier. My family didn't even have to make my life small anymore. I had learned to do it for them. Now, Ethan. I met him 8 years ago at a wedding neither of us wanted to attend. He owns a small locksmith shop, handles most of the service calls himself, and is one of those people who can sit in silence without feeling the need to rescue everyone from it. And yes, I told my family about him. 6 months after we started dating, I mentioned him at a birthday dinner. Mom looked surprised. You're seeing someone? Yeah. For how long? About 6 months. Marlo actually stopped eating. 6 months? Then Mom asked what he did. He's a locksmith. He owns his own shop? Marlo smiled. So he makes keys? He owns the business. Okay, Val, I wasn't insulting him. Mom looked at me. Don't get defensive, she asked a question. I hadn't raised my voice. Less than 10 seconds later, Mom turned back to Marlo. So what happened with Owen's preschool application? My father smiled into his drink, Wells kept eating, and Mom made that little sound she always makes when somebody says something rude, and she would rather manage my reaction than stop theirs. Marlo, it wasn't a warning. If anything, it sounded affectionate, Marlo shrugged. I'm just asking. Less than 10 seconds later, Mom turned back to her. So what happened with Owen's preschool application? That was it. 6 months of my relationship disappeared between 2 bites of dinner. Nobody asked where Ethan and I met. Nobody asked what he was like. Nobody asked if I was happy. 3 weeks later, Mom caught me alone in her kitchen. Val, can I say something? I already knew I wasn't going to enjoy what came next. Just be careful with this Ethan thing. With what? She gave me that soft, concerned smile mothers use when they want something cruel to sound protective. At your age, sometimes you want something to work so badly that you convince yourself it does. I asked if Ethan had done something she didn't like. She shrugged. I don't know him. Exactly. She didn't know him because nobody had bothered to. A few months later, Mom called on a Saturday and asked me to come help set up for a family dinner. I told her Ethan and I already had plans. Marlo was in the background. Wait, you're still seeing the locksmith? I heard my mother laugh. Not loudly, just enough. Yes, I said, I'm still seeing Ethan. Marlo said, wow, okay. Then Mom came back on the phone. So can you come or not? After that, I stopped bringing him up. At first, I told myself I was protecting the relationship. But eventually, silence became easier than watching everything important to me get reduced to a joke or a warning. A year later, Ethan and I moved in together. I didn't tell them. 2 years after that, he proposed in our kitchen on a Tuesday night. There was no audience, no photographer, no speech. We had already agreed we would choose the ring together. He asked. I said yes. Then I spent 3 days trying to figure out how to tell my family. Every version in my head ended the same way. Marlo made a joke, Mom told me not to take it personally, Dad changed the subject, and somehow I ended up apologizing for making everyone uncomfortable. So I said nothing. We got married at the courthouse on a Thursday morning with 8 people there. Ethan's brother came. 2 of my friends rearranged their schedules. Our neighbors, Delphine and her husband, stood beside us on the courthouse steps. My family wasn't there, and the part one still hate admitting is that I checked my phone twice that morning. Mom had no idea I was getting married. She had absolutely no reason to call. But I checked anyway. The wedding photograph still hangs in our hallway. I look happy in it because I was happy, but there is an empty space in that picture that has bothered me ever since. Not because my mother refused to come, because I never gave her the chance. Then I made another decision that became harder to explain with every year that passed. I started hiding my wedding ring. Before every family dinner, birthday, or holiday, I would pull over about 3 streets from my parents' house. I took the ring off, threaded it onto a chain I kept in the glove box, tucked it under my shirt, and walked inside as the version of Valerie they already understood. Single. Flexible. Available. On the drive home, I put the ring back on my finger. I did that for 4 years. One Christmas, Marlo hugged me and felt the chain beneath my shirt. What's that? My hand went straight to it. A locket. She looked at me for half a second, said, huh, and walked away when somebody opened another bottle of wine. That was how close my family came to discovering I had a husband. Ethan knew about all of it, and for longer than he should have, he let me handle it my way. Then one night we had dinner with his brother's family. They were loud and nosy, interrupted each other, asked about my work, asked Ethan about the shop, and remembered things I had told them months earlier. On the drive home, Ethan was unusually quiet. At a red light, he finally spoke. Val, is there a version of this where I get to be a real person to your family? I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. Or am I always going to be something you hide before you walk through the door? That hurt, because there was no good answer. I told him it was complicated. He nodded. The light turned green, and he never asked me again. That was worse than a fight. He simply stopped expecting a place in my family. By then, I had even saved him under another name in my phone, because our family group chat was relentless, and my screen was always sitting face up somewhere. 4 years married. Same house. Same mortgage. Same bed. And my husband was stored under an alias so my family wouldn't accidentally discover he existed. Then my parents announced their 40th anniversary dinner. Private room downtown. More than 30 people between family, friends, and people from their church. Mom called me that afternoon. "You are coming, right?" "Of course." "Good, I don't want your father wondering where everybody is." "Everybody." I almost laughed. 3 streets from the restaurant, I pulled over, took off my wedding ring, slipped it onto the chain, and tucked it beneath my shirt. Then I walked inside alone. About an hour later, Marlo stood up with a glass in her hand. She toasted our parents and talked about 40 years of commitment, family, and love. Everybody around the room smiled. Then she turned toward me. And her smile changed. She started warm. 40 years, Mom and Dad, an example to us all. People made the noises people make. Marlo turned to me with her glass raised. 39 and still single, Val? That empty house has got to feel pretty big when you get home, huh? The room laughed. Not cruelly. It was a warm laugh, the kind that meant we all love you and we all agree about you. I did not laugh. I looked at my mother. She saw my face and sighed. Val, don't be so dramatic. Marlo's just teasing. 40 years of that sentence. It had covered everything. I put my glass down. Don't worry, I said. I've been married for 4 years. The whole table froze. 30 people, suddenly silent. A fork hit a plate near the back and it sounded ridiculously loud. Marlo stared at me. What? I'm married. My mother's mouth opened and shut. My father said my name once, like a question. Marlo recovered first. That's not funny. I told her it was not a joke. His name was Ethan. We lived on Ferris Street. She had driven past the house. Prove it. So I reached under my shirt, pulled out the chain, and let my wedding ring hang there where everyone could see it. My aunt made a sound. Somebody near the back said, "Oh my God." And my sister sat down without another word, which for Marlo is the loudest thing she can do. Then my mother finally spoke, and it was not to me. She said, to the table, "Well, this is quite a night." And she picked up her fork. I need you to understand what happened next, because it told me everything. Within about 4 minutes, the room repaired itself. My uncle started a story about a boat. The waiters brought coffee. 2 cousins came over to congratulate me quietly, the way you do at a funeral. Nobody asked me his last name. Nobody asked how we met. Nobody asked to see a photograph, and I had 11 of them on the phone in my hand. 39 years of being the vacancy, and I had just announced I was a whole house, and the family's response was to move on to dessert. Wells said, "Wait, 4 years?" about 6 times over the course of the evening, in real bewilderment, as though the problem were mathematical. Marlo found her footing eventually, and when she did, it was exactly where I expected. "So you just lied to us. For 4 years." I told her I never lied. Not once. Not a single person at that table had ever asked me a question that required the answer. She said that was ridiculous, that we talked all the time. So I asked her, in front of everyone, to name one thing I had done in the past year that was not a favor for somebody in that room. She could not. She stood there with her glass and she could not, and she went red, and my father said maybe we should all sit down, and the party dissolved into people talking loudly about other things. I left at 9. In the parking lot my mother came out after me, which I did not expect. "Why would you keep that from us?" I did not have a clean answer. I told her I never figured out how to bring anything into that house, because every time I tried it, got weighed and found small. That's not fair. Then she said goodnight and went back inside to her party. I drove home with the ring on my hand for the first time in 4 years. Ethan had waited up. He asked how it went. I said I told them, and he said, "Oh." Then he made me eggs at 10 at night because I had not eaten anything at a dinner I attended for 4 hours. The family group chat went off for 2 hours. I watched it with the sound off. Marlo, I'm sorry, but does anyone else think this is bizarre? An aunt. Congratulations, Valerie. Marlo, 4 years. On Mom and Dad's anniversary of all nights. Wells. Wait, so is he coming to Thanksgiving, Marlo? That's not the point, Wells. Nobody wrote to me. 2 hours of messages about me, in a chat I was sitting in, and not one of them addressed to me. I turned the phone face down and went to bed, and I want to tell you, I felt vindicated. I did not. I felt like I had thrown a rock into a lake and watched it close over. Now here is where the story actually starts. Because I assumed, driving home that night, that something had shifted. That was my mistake, and I had 4 decades of evidence I chose to ignore for about 18 hours. My mother had a hip replacement scheduled for the following month. Everybody knew. Not an emergency, on the calendar since spring. And the next afternoon, Wells sent a document to the family group. A care schedule. 6 weeks. Detailed. Somebody had clearly spent real time on it. Week 1, 24-hour coverage. Weeks 2 through 4, days plus overnight. Weeks 5 and 6, tapering. Meal prep, physical therapy transport, medication management. Every single overnight was assigned to me. Every weekday transport was assigned to me. 4 of the 6 weekends, me. Marlo had 2 afternoons. Wells had, as needed, weekends, work permitting. Now here is where my boring job earns its place in this story. I do not read documents the way normal people read them. I read them for what is underneath. And the first thing I do with any file somebody sends me, before I read a word of it, is check the properties. Created date. Author. Revision history. I opened the file properties on my mother's care schedule while standing in my own kitchen. Created 11 days before the anniversary dinner. Wells had sent it. Marlo had written it. 11 days before she stood up at a restaurant and made a joke about how empty my house was, my sister had sat down and assigned me 6 weeks of nights. There were 14 revisions on it. Somebody had gone back and forth moving things around, and every time they moved something, it landed on me. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen with my back against the dishwasher. Then I called my mother. Calmly, I said I wanted to talk about the schedule. And she said the sentence that ended something in me permanently. Oh, honey, Marlo put that together before we knew about Ethan. Don't worry, she'll redo it. A pause. Actually, this is perfect. Ethan can help. He owns his own shop, right? He can set his own hours. There it was, completely undisguised. They had spent 4 decades treating my life as unclaimed territory because I was single. And the instant they discovered I was not single, the first instinct was not to give the space back. It was to expand the claim. Now there were 2 of us available. My husband, a man they had never met, whose name my mother had learned 19 hours earlier, had already been assigned unpaid labor. And I finally understood the thing I had been getting wrong my entire life. It was never about me being alone. Alone was just the excuse that fit best. If I had married at 24 like Marlo, they would have found something else, because the belief underneath all of it was that my time was a shared family resource, and everybody else's was private property. Marlo has the kids. Wells has work. Valerie has a life too, but nobody had ever written that sentence down. If you have ever been the one everybody assumed was free, stay with me, because what I did next is the entire reason I am telling you this. Before anything else, I did not abandon my mother. That is the version Marlo told people for about a year, and it is a lie. Refusing to be the only one is not the same as refusing. Here is what I did, and I did it in 4 days. I called the surgeon's office myself. Nobody in my family had. I asked what the real recovery requirements were, and the nurse walked me through it in about 6 minutes. The first 72 hours are the intensive part. After that, it is manageable with structure and equipment. They had built a 6-week fortress out of guesses. Nobody had made one phone call. Then I got quotes from 3 home care agencies and picked one. A licensed aide, weekday mornings, for the first month. $240 a day. I paid the first 2 weeks myself, before anybody agreed to anything, because I knew there would be a fight, and I wanted my mother covered while it happened. That money came out of what Ethan and I had been putting aside for a new key cutting machine for his shop, which he needed that year and did not get. He never once brought it up. I am the one who has to live with it. Then I sent one message to the family group with the revised schedule. Professional aid, weekday mornings, costs split 3 ways between the siblings. Overnights rotated, and the specificity is the whole point, not we'll figure it out. Assigned. Marlowe, Sunday and Wednesday. Wells, Tuesday and Friday. Me, Monday and Thursday. Saturdays rotating. I took exactly 1/3. Not more, not less. Marlowe called within 4 minutes. Val, I have 3 kids, and I said the sentence I had been carrying around unsaid for years. I have a family too, Marlowe. You've just never counted it. Silence on the line. Real silence, not a pause. She recovered as she does and started listing things. Soccer. A work thing. The middle one's reading tutor. I let her finish, told her I understood, told her the schedule stood, and said if her Wednesday did not work she should trade with Wells. Then I hung up and put the phone on the counter because my hands were shaking too hard to hold it. Nobody tells you that part. Setting a boundary at 39 with a family that has never had one does not feel powerful. It feels like being sick. The surgery was on a Tuesday. I was there at 5:30 in the morning. So was my father. Marlowe came at 9 after drop-off. Wells came after it was already over. In the waiting room, my father sat next to me for 3 hours with a paper cup he never drank from, and around hour 2, without any preamble, he said, "Your mother didn't sleep last night." I said that was normal before surgery. Not about the surgery. He turned the cup around. She sat up. She said, 4 years, Doug. She was in that girl's life for 4 years, and I never even knew her name. Then he stopped talking, and we sat there, and that is the closest my father has ever come to saying anything to me about anything. Mom came out of it fine. Textbook. I stayed those first 72 hours myself, all 3 nights. Because that was the actual intensive window, and I had said I would take it. Marlowe called on the 2nd night to see how it was going. From her house. Then week 2 started, the schedule went live, and everything came apart. Wells missed his first overnight, just did not show. My mother called me at 11 at night from her own bed. I did not drive over. I called Wells 4 times. Voicemail. Then I called the agency and paid for an emergency overnight aid. And she was at the house within the hour, and I stayed on the phone with my mother until the doorbell rang. The next morning, my mother told Marlowe that I would not come. Marlowe told our aunt. By the weekend, the story in the family was that Valerie left Mom alone in the middle of the night. The story never included the aid. It never included that Wells simply did not go. It never included who paid for the fix. I did not defend myself, not because I am serene, because defending yourself to people who have already assigned you a role just gives them more material. But I was not going to let my brother pay nothing, either. There is a difference between not arguing and not collecting. So I drove to his house on Sunday afternoon. He came to the door with a beer in his hand and a game on behind him, and said, "Hey Val," like nothing had happened. I told him he missed Tuesday. "Yeah, work thing ran long. I figured you'd cover it." And I said, "I did cover it. It cost $240. Here." I handed him the invoice. Printed. His name written across the top in pen. He looked at it and laughed. And then he looked at my face and stopped laughing. "You're serious." I told him I was extremely serious, and that his mother had been alone in a bed she could not get out of unassisted until a stranger arrived, and that the invoice was the smallest part of what that had cost. He paid me that week. He did not miss another shift for 6 weeks. Marlowe took longer, because Marlowe had to actually do it. 2 overnights a week and a rotating Saturday. Getting a woman with a new hip to the bathroom at 3 in the morning. Managing a medication schedule. Sitting there for hours while the television was on. and nobody was watching it. She lasted about 10 days before she started making noises about how exhausting it was. And in week 3, in my mother's kitchen, she said something she did not mean the way it came out. "I don't know how you did this by yourself for so many years." I did not say anything. I just looked at her, and I watched her hear it, my sister's face doing the arithmetic in real time next to the coffee maker, on every Christmas setup and every eye appointment and every grandmother week and every one of those years, and something in her expression came apart. She did not apologize. Marlo does not apologize. But she never said, "Marlo has the kids" to me again. Not once, in 2 years. That sentence died in that kitchen. And there was one more thing, which I did not arrange and could not have. The aide's name was Prudence, 60-something, 22 years in home care, absolutely no interest in family dynamics. In week 4, at a handoff, my mother said something to her about how her daughters were sharing the load now and how nice it was to have everyone pitching in. And Prudence, buttoning her coat, said, "Well, this one's been paying my invoices since day 1. Whatever else is going on, you should know she set all this up before anybody said yes." Then she left. She was not making a point. She had somewhere to be. My mother did not say anything to me about it that day, but she looked at me differently for the rest of that afternoon, and I noticed, and I did not push it. 10 weeks after the surgery, she asked if she could see our house. She had never asked. In 6 years of my living there, my mother had never once seen the place. She came on a Sunday. Ethan cooked, because Ethan cooks. I had not planned anything else. But Delphine and her husband, 2 of the 8 people on those courthouse steps, came by around 3, because they always do on Sundays, and stayed. Then Ethan's brother stopped in. Then a friend of ours brought a tray of something. By 6, there were 9 people in my house, and it had happened entirely by itself, the way a Sunday does when you have built something over years. I watched my mother watch it. She sat in an armchair in the corner and saw people come in without knocking. She saw Ethan's brother go into my kitchen and find a bowl without asking where it was. She heard 4 different people call me Val in a way that was not a diminishment. At one point, Ethan brought her a plate and crouched down beside her chair to hear her better, because she is soft-spoken, and stayed crouched there for the whole conversation, and I had to go into the other room. She stood in our hallway for a long time in front of the wedding photograph. I know because I came looking for her. 8 people on courthouse steps. She did not say anything about the hole in it. I did not either. At the end of the night, at the door, with her coat on, she said something to my husband. "I'm 4 years late, but welcome to the family, Ethan." And Ethan, who is a better person than I am, said thank you and meant it. She cried in the car. My father told me that months later. Now here is the part 1 replay. 6 weeks after that, a family thing at my parents' house. Near the end of it, when people were moving toward the door, Marlo said, in the way she has always said it, "Val, can you stay and help with cleanup? I've got to get them to bed." Complete reflex. 39 years of muscle memory in one sentence, and I felt my own body start to say yes before my brain caught up. And my mother from the kitchen doorway said, "Don't put that on Valerie. She's got her own life to get back to." 9 words. Nobody clapped. Marlo just said, "Oh, okay, fine," and got a bag, and my mother started stacking plates, and the evening ended. I looked across the room at Ethan, and he raised his eyebrows about 1/4 of an inch, which, in his language, is a standing ovation. I have thought a lot about why those 9 words hit harder than an apology would have. An apology is about the past. What my mother did in that doorway was about the next 20 years. She did not say sorry for 4 decades of assuming. She just stopped assuming, out loud, in front of the person who had benefited from it most. We drove home that night, and I did a small thing I had been putting off. I opened my phone and changed his name in my contacts, deleted the alias I had used for 4 years and typed in Ethan, and then, because I was feeling something, added the word husband after it. It took a few seconds. I cried the whole way home. The chain is in a drawer in our bedroom. I have not worn it since that night in the parking lot. I did not throw it out, and I have thought about why, and I think it is because I want to know it is there. It is the only proof I have of what 4 years of making yourself small actually looks like. and some part of me does not trust myself to remember without it. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone in recognizing the kind of family role that slowly becomes a life sentence. Here on Rose Untold Stories, we tell stories about family betrayal, quiet boundaries, second chances, and the moment someone finally stops accepting the place everyone else chose for them. Sometimes the ending is justice, sometimes it is forgiveness, and sometimes the biggest victory is simply learning that your time, your home, and your life belong to you too. If you enjoy stories where people find their voice without losing themselves, subscribe to Rose Untold Stories and join us for the next one. And if Valerie's story stayed with you, tell me in the comments, what was the sentence your family always used to make you the one who had to say yes? Thank you for spending this time with me.